functioning of the network.
Okay, great.
And we have this year 143 participants, either on site, either online, from really all over Europe, including some African participants, and very diverse, but I would say not that much students, contrary to what one could expect about a summer school, but most of the people are young professionals.
Okay, nice.
So it works very well. We collaborate a lot with the European Commission. The Commission is sending every year 10 persons for training to our summer school, and we invite as guest speakers also some practitioners from the Commission.
Okay, that sounds like a very good setup.
That's it in a nutshell. I'm afraid that as you have academic interest, that from time to time we would be happy to have the possibility to rely upon your knowledge without disturbing you too much.
I would be honored.
And yes, well, that's a great. That's, I think, also, well, the fact that you also worked in the Fundamental Rights Agency before, I would say that that's a good sign for the beginning of your work, for your independence. One can hope that in such difficult moments, you will have the possibility to do a good job, because you enter into an institution that seems to be in crisis for the moment.
I think it's there are many challenges indeed, and I think my profile in a way is very helpful. That I come from the outside, I think it's helpful. That I come from another EU institutions, I understand the institutional setup and the bureaucracy and the practices and all these things.
Yes.
And I think that combination is very good, external but still understanding the processes, and I feel that is helpful and has been helpful already this first month. So yes, I think it's helpful, and I hope I will be able to contribute to improving things.
Yes, you have a real challenge in front of you.
I will do my very best.
And it's quite clear that, everybody in Europe is looking, listening, and ready to read all what you will, of course, produce.
Let's hope I can do something useful and deliver on those expectations.
Good. So I imagine that going to ask how many participants are already online. Elona or Afit, are you there?
Yes.
You can start, Philip. Send you a message, and there's 35 participants online, so you can start the lesson.
Okay, plus the ones in the room, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So, okay, I let you continue. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So let's indeed start this session. And I am really very happy that we have the chance this morning to have as a guest speaker Jonas Grimheden, who is actually the new Prof, as people say, but this means more clearly the fundamental rights officer in Frontex agency. And Mr. Grimheden has been appointed actually very recently and started his duties on the 1st of June. The idea is that after a first statement of Mr. Grimheden, we then enter into question time, discussion with the audience, and we will have to finish this session a few minutes before 9 o'clock, because Mr. Grimheden has another meeting. So very briefly, let me just say three elements about the fundamental rights officer in Frontex. When you read the regulation, I think that what is very clear is that the legislator has taken care of the independence of the fundamental rights officer, because the boss, your boss, Mr. Grimheden, is not the executive director, but the management board. You are appointed by the management board and you report to the management board. Secondly, about your tasks, when you look at Article 109, you see that you have in that provision a list of not least 11 tasks that you are supposed to fulfill. I will just mention, I think, the more important ones. Under point B, you have the duty to monitor the agency's compliance with fundamental rights into any of its activities. So that's a very large and broad mandate. And then, of course, under point G, the most interesting part is that you are supposed to carry out on-the-spot visits. So you have the power to go on the spot when Frontex is doing joint operation, rapid border intervention, pilot projects, team management support, teams return operation. Well, actually all the operational work of the agency, including in third countries. And then the last point that I noticed when reading that provision is that actually your main power is influence. You have a dialogue with the executive director. The director is supposed on some points to reply officially to your remarks. You publish an annual report about your activities and the human rights compliance of the agency in its tasks. So it's not a power of sanction. You cannot sanction anybody unless from a political point of view, because it's quite clear that you will have, if no formal power, actually a lot of power in terms of political pressure on the agency, because your remarks will of course be scrutinized and taken in consideration, in particular with the recent events and the accusations against the agency, which for the moment is, I think, a body in crisis. But let's hope that in the future it will be possible for the agency to go back to normality and respect human rights during its activities. So after this brief introduction, I leave you the floor and thank you really warmly for having accepted to be our guest. It's absolutely essential for our summer school to have the possibility to rely on practitioners. And I have to say that actually you are not only a practitioner, because after 10 years in the Fundamental Rights Agency of Vienna, you are now in Warsaw, but actually you in your career had a lot of academic activities. You are actually an academic, you do research, you do teaching, and you are still active in your home university in Lund in Sweden. So we are, of course, as academics, very happy to see one of us taking such an important and interesting tasks. And I give you now the floor. Thanks again. We don't hear you. You should open your microphone, or there is another problem.
That was my problem. The problem was all mine. I was saying thank you very much, Professor de Bruycker, and thanks to this summer school for this opportunity to interact. It's my pleasure to be with you this morning. And I would like to say a few things in the beginning, maybe 5 clusters of things that I would like to highlight. First of all, I'd like to comment on the very good analysis by Professor de Bruycker on my mandate, and on a personal note, I think after 1 month in the office, that list of 11 points feels like much longer than 11 points. I've been involved in so many things already, from down-to-earth things to more advanced things, legal, practical, you name it. So it feels more like 111 things than 11, but that's the nature of things, I guess. You mentioned also the challenges, and indeed it's a difficult time, I think, for when it comes to migration in Europe. It's a difficult time for the European Union in many areas. It's a difficult time for the agency that I now work for Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency. It's an agency with a very, very particular mandate. It's an agency with a huge increase in its mandate in late years, and it's an agency with a huge increase in staff. Here at headquarters, the numbers are going up, new colleagues every day, and just for me personally, I have 10 new colleagues starting this very morning, or maybe 12. I even don't know the exact number. And on the standing corps, which is a new feature for the European Union, that will be an armed, uniformed service of the European Union. The goal is to recruit up to 10,000 in the coming years. And some of these, a few hundred, are already have already been recruited, and a couple of my colleagues are providing fundamental rights training to them as we speak. It's ongoing for the last couple of weeks, and it's another week left. This training is taking place in Spain. And of course, all the media attention, civil society attention, which is very, very helpful for the organization, but also, of course, challenging for the organization, is part of that challenge. I also like, as a second point, to highlight the independence, something that Professor Bruycker also mentioned. I was recruited externally. I think that's very helpful. I come with a background that I think is helpful, a bit of academic, a bit of EU. I wrote my PhD on judicial independence. I have I like to say, an advanced understanding of impartiality and independence, and I'm sensitive to those things. And I can say, at least after the first month and in the recruitment process leading up to this month, that I've been nothing but treated as an independent advisor and an independent monitor. And they have made a lot of changes to the rules at the agency to ensure that this plays out in detail. Just to give you an example, the executive director would sign all the recruitment contracts, so staff employment contracts. But as of when I started, I signed all the contracts with my staff. So in that sense, in an EU agency context, I'm the appointing authority for these staff, and many other similar features ensure that I'm independent. And I report then, as was mentioned, to the management board, and I already had a couple of weeks ago the first opportunity to meet with them in person and to raise my initial concerns, and I took that opportunity to highlight many of the problems that we see. And I'll come to the next cluster would be the problems and the complexities. But before that, I'd like to say also in relation to the independence and how I operate, I think the credibility is essential. So that means that I must be a credible actor internally and externally. That's a fine balance, but I think it's something that has to be there in order for me to have an impact. I cannot be an advocate that pushes in the extreme. I have to rely on EU law, on international law, on international rights law, and make a solid case for the changes that I advocate for, again, to ensure my credibility and thus impact. On the complexity, the third cluster, if I just highlight one thing, if we think of a boat in the Aegean Sea, a boat that belongs to the Greek Coast Guard, the Hellenic Coast Guard, and it operates there, and it is interacting with an incoming boat, a rubber boat from the Turkish side. If we just stay with that image, there's that rubber boat, there's a Hellenic Coast Guard, and many of you have maybe seen videos like this, which are frequent and many online. What are the complexities in this situation? Well, the sea is not very clear on where the border is, right? There are waves. Where is the Turkish side? Where is the Greek side? A sea border is not that exact. So is the Coast Guard boat on on the right side of the border? Is the rubber boat on the right side of the border? It's not very clear. So that's part of the complexity. And a second part of that complexity is that in some instances, it's not even clear international law-wise where the border is, because there are disputes between Greece and Turkey about where the border line goes. A third element of that complexity relates to international law, EU law, that is clear to some extent, but not sufficiently clear for all the concrete situations that occur. So the law could be clearer. A fourth element is maybe the situational, the operational situation, maybe rather. It might be windy, it might be a very calm day, there might be waves, there might be not. The boat might be very seaworthy, or the boat might not be. There could be many other boats in the vicinity. There could be land, islets in the vicinity. All this makes a difference about the situation, the assessment of the situation. And finally, on the complexity, and maybe the most challenging one, two additional things. A boat, that Hellenic Coast Guard boat, could be co-financed by the European Union, by Frontex. There could be other boats that are co-financed by Frontex. It could be that it's funded at this very moment, or it could be that it's funded another time of the day, or another time of the week, or another boat. It could be that Frontex supports only with staff on the ground, in the harbor, or on land. And to what extent is Frontex facilitation of other tasks enabling the Hellenic Coast Guard to allocate more resources to the sea where things might go wrong? I'm not saying that they are, but there's of course a lot of allegations and problems seemingly on the border between Turkey and Greece. So all these complexities about this boat plays in. So if it was very clear, if the situation was, it's happening here, it's that time of the day, this is the responsibility, it's Greek authorities, or it's Frontex, or it's 50-50, but it's not that simple. So it's very, very difficult. And I'm not saying this as an excuse, but to highlight the complexity of making assessments. A fourth cluster, and I promised you 5 clusters, so a fourth one, second but last, is the tools that I have at my disposal. And the investigations was something that was mentioned already, but if I would give you maybe 4 elements of tools that I have. And firstly, I think is a tool that is not so explicit in the regulation, but the fundamental rights officer and the office here. So I have 15 colleagues here at headquarters, in addition to the eventually 40 monitors that will be more field-based. But with these 15 colleagues, we are able and invited, and we are mandated to, we are most welcome to contribute, and our input is taken into consideration in all aspects of the agency, in terms of preparing operational plans, in terms of training, and all these documents and processes of establishing the baseline or the base for actions. We are involved and can say this fundamental rights component needs to be strengthened. This formulation is not in line with international law, with EU law, and what I've seen so far is at least a strong willingness to make the adaptations that we suggest. So this internal process, this internal advisory role, is very influential in setting the standards at headquarters, and that affects, of course, the operational plans and the operations. A second part of the tools is complaints. So any person affected by a Frontex activity or a Frontex staff member can file a complaint, and those complaints come to my office, where we deal with them, and we then can advise the executive director, or if it's something that is outside the Frontex mandate, we can relay the complaints to the responsible complaint mechanisms in the member states. This is a bit of an underused or a difficult mechanism to use, so it's not that many complaint cases, but I think it has potential. And as all complaint-based data, even if it's one case, it could have a strong impact on changing the culture of an organization or understanding a situation, etc. The third tool is what we call SIR, SIR or SIRS, Serious Incident Reports. It's in a way a self-reflecting internal tool for Frontex, where we can file, anyone can file in a way, one of these reports and say that something wrong happened. We don't know why, but it's sort of a learning tool. We don't know why this happened, but we think it's not right. And that could relate to the use of force by ourselves, by Frontex staff. It could relate to an incident at sea that we were that we saw ourselves or heard about. It could be something that we read about in media or get an NGO report about. And these serious incident reports then leads to an investigation, or at least a fact-finding check with all the involved parties as far as possible, at least the authorities involved, where we try to find out what actually happened and see in an educational way, in a learning way, what could have been done differently. And it's a system that is, again, what I've seen so far, very useful, involving all kinds of actors in the agency, where we try to see what happened again and what we could have done differently. The fourth and final of the tools I wanted to mention is what I've already alluded to, the fundamental rights monitor. So I mentioned today that 10 or so new colleagues start, and these are so-called fundamental rights monitors. We call them FROMs. Not an ideal acronym, but acronym seems to be on vogue in the agency. So the regulation talks about that Frontex should have 40 fundamental rights monitors, and actually they should have been in place by December 2020. And a very interesting feature in the regulation, it's the only time I'm aware of where there's a clear deadline on recruitment of staff by a certain number and a certain date. And unfortunately, the agency didn't deliver on that deadline, but now we are trying to catch up. So when I started a month ago, there were 2 or 3 monitors already in place. 2 weeks ago, another 5 or so started, and today there are 10 or so that we will reach, I think, close to 20 today, or we should be about 20 additional staff today, meaning 20 fundamental rights monitors. And we have an advanced plan on how to get the other 20, of course, and maybe this year we will be 30, and maybe early next year 40, or even sooner than that. That number is, of course, important to reach, but at the same time, we are starting from scratch. We are doing something that hasn't been done before with totally new people. So I'm also not too worried about a bit of delay, because 20 people in a new situation, new context, with a new task is difficult enough, and maybe it's good that we have a bit of a staggered approach with an incremental number of monitors, so that we learn also in that context. And we could apply, we could deploy, we could use these monitors in various ways. I could pretend that I know exactly what to do. It's my role to decide, but I think I've said several times that I only have one principle on how to do this, and that is that I basically do not know, and that we will have to be agile and flexible and learn by doing, because no organization, to my knowledge, in a situation like this has ever had an internal monitoring mechanism of this nature, and it would be very presumptuous of me to think that I have the answer to this. Rather, I need to learn myself. I need to see how things work, and we will have to try and test and see what has the most impact. So I think to paraphrase Mario Draghi, the former European central banker, who said to save the euro, he would do anything it takes. And I think my view is that I will change anything it takes to get impact. That's my role, and I don't want to be stuck on a particular way of working, but within the parameters, within the law that regulates us, I would like to make the best possible use of these monitors with a view to have impact on the ground. I have one more cluster, I think, and And before moving to that, I wanted to say also in relation to the overall of the tools, I think leverage is an important aspect. Leverage in the sense that I have under the regulation a possibility to advise the executive director to pull out, to stop cooperating with the country, which is of course a nice mandate, a nice option maybe, but in terms of fundamental rights, in terms of improving the situation, maybe that doesn't have necessarily the best impact on the situation. If Frontex is present, if the situation is caused more by the member state than Frontex itself, leaving a member state on its own is maybe not the best result or best situation for fundamental rights. I would like to use that threat as far as possible as leverage and say that we need these additional safeguards to be in place. Otherwise, we will have to use Article 46 rather than simply pull out using the same provision. Coming down to the final of my 5 clusters, and I hope I managed to get to 5 clusters, and that's the reality on the ground. I think that relates very much to the complexity and to the credibility that I've talked about, and that reality on the ground. I'd like to mention a couple of small things. 2 weeks ago, I was standing on an island in the Atlantic Ocean watching a boat disembark, 25 migrants coming from all over Africa, but had been on a boat for 8 days and nights, on a boat that I would not recommend. I'm used to the sea, but I would not go in that very, very far from land. They had been on the open sea for 8 days and nights. Luckily, all of them survived. They disembarked. They were all in good health, but of course, very, very tired and confused after this time and lack of food, lack of water. And I was able to see how Frontex supported the disembarkation, worked smoothly with the Spanish authorities. And I think that was a very important thing for me to see, how things can work very well and how the EU and how Frontex can work very well with member states and help people, basically. And related to reality, next on Sunday, actually, I will go to Greece together with some colleagues, some of these new fundamental rights monitors, where we will visit different places and try to establish as much as possible the facts on the ground and learn as much as possible with a view, of course, to see how things work in Greece and how things could maybe be improved. And I'm very much looking forward to that. I will not be with my team in all places, but I think altogether we will be in 4 different locations, and I will be in 2 of them, I think. And I think this is just the beginning. So this time I'm going with them, but in the future, of course, the eventually 40 fundamental rights monitors will be able to do this on a regular basis, be at borders, be it sea, land, air, be it in the south, in the Mediterranean, or in the north, wherever the EU's external borders are. And of course, we will have to have a risk-based approach so that we go to the places that are most risk-prone. And that's in that view, that's also why I have joined missions twice I went to Spain and will go to Greece, since these are indeed areas that have a higher and heightened risk of fundamental rights violations, as I see it. That was much longer than I thought I would speak. Sorry for being so lengthy. I got enthusiastic, and now I'm all yours for the remaining half an hour. And now I think we need your mic button.
Exactly. My microphone should be open. I just wanted to say that you have not been long. You gave us a good taste about the complexity, in particular, of your tasks. And before giving the floor to the participants of the summer school, I would like maybe to make one remark, and you will tell me what you think about it. Actually, your mandate is limited to Frontex operations. It means that, or I'm not correct, you will tell me, that when you have member states controlling their own borders, but without Frontex, you will not then be present, or is it not the case. I asked this question because in terms of, you spoke about credibility. Well, the understanding also of the public will be important, because maybe some people will say, we hear that there are problems at the Croatian borders and the fundamental rights officer is doing nothing. Well, if I understand well, you will not have the mandate to work with the Croatians if Frontex is not coordinating an operation. Is that correct?
It's partly correct, but the overall assessment that you make, that it in the eyes of the public, it's very, very difficult to draw the distinction. And that's a point also I made that I made in various contexts, that there might be it might be possible to determine a legal line, what is responsible, what is my mandate, what is not. But in terms of fundamental rights risks, in terms of perceptions, I think very few would care about those details. If people are dying in the Mediterranean, if people are pushed back on borders, if Frontex is involved directly or not doesn't really matter in the eyes of the public. As to my mandate, it's interesting that the complaints mechanism, at least, and the serious incident reports could relate to activities that are relate to a joint operation. So it could relate to staff that is not Frontex, for instance, complaints about, but those complaints which should relate to the national authorities. So what I could investigate at least would be the Frontex involvement, but also the joint operations. Sorry. So, and that would of course be very good if it was extremely clear, but it's not extremely clear. And since it's not extremely clear, maybe that is an advantage actually, that we will be able to be a bit more general. And to maybe take one step back, the regulation talks about assessing the fundamental rights situation in a country before engaging. So in a way, that would seem to relate to the whole fundamental rights, human rights situation of a country. So that I would somehow have as a mandate. But the specific investigations might be more related to joint operations. What does that mean? So if Frontex is doing a joint operation in a particular coastal section or a border section or a particular airport, that joint operation would seem to encompass those activities. If we would read that narrowly, it would be very strange, because then if Frontex is providing a fingerprinting expert, then we would only be responsible for the fingerprinting. That cannot be, that doesn't make sense. Then it doesn't have any real impact. So I think the joint operation has to be read as the area of activity, and then it, of course, is relevant if it's a Frontex, direct Frontex action, or it's a member state action within that joint operation. And at least as I understand it, after 1 month, it's not limited to Frontex staff only in that context. It relates to the joint operation. So if Frontex supports an activity in an operation as part of a joint operation, that joint operation is indeed within my mandate. How this will play out in reality from case to case, that I'm yet to discover. But at least it's a fascinating area and not easy to distinguish and discern.
Yes, thanks a lot. Well, you were speaking about complexity. We can see that it is indeed very complex, but at the same time, you underline that the goal in practice is to protect human rights. My last question before giving the floor to the audience of the summer school would be about cooperation with national mechanisms for the protection of human rights, because in the pact, the new pact proposed by the Commission, one provision, Article 7 of the screening regulations, requires the member states to create their own independent mechanism to protect human rights. Do you foresee to establish a link and cooperation with a national mechanism that are going to be set up? And I know, for instance, that in Croatia, while the regulation is not yet in place, there is already a board that has been created to monitor human rights when the Croatian border guards are operating.
Very good question, and indeed there is that obligation to appoint or establish or create, ensure that there is this mechanism or envisaged obligation, and Croatia has already acted on that, and I think that's a very good case study. When it comes to the complaints mechanism that we have, we are mandated to engage with the national complaints mechanisms in order to distribute cases. If we receive a case that relates to a national or a situation that is not concerned with Frontex, we should hand over those cases to the national authority at some point. In third countries, we also have agreements with the authorities in order to have the same solution in place. If a case concerns an Albanian citizen that is involved in a Frontex joint operation, we might get the case, but then we will have to or be able to hand that case over to an Albanian complaints mechanism, for instance. In terms of cooperation in general, I think we would be mistaken if we would not cooperate with the national human rights institution, with ombuds institutions, with whatever complaint mechanisms there are, monitoring mechanisms at national level. And that also goes for regional mechanisms and international mechanisms. So I've met with CPT, the Committee on the Prevention of Torture, a few days ago here in Warsaw, and that's of course one logical cooperation partner. On Tuesday next week, I'm meeting with the staff from the European Ombudsman and also the network of ombuds institutions from all EU and European EU member states in particular. And on Monday, we're meeting with the Greek ombudsman, all with a view to better understand each other's work and see where it makes sense to learn from each other, cooperate, etc. So I think there's clearly a role and an opportunity for us to engage with them in various ways. And again, I couldn't say in detail how that will play out, but I'm already on it and hope to do as much with these institutions as possible. And I know their capacity and their skills, and that's something we have to draw on.
Thank you very much. Well, let us now ask the participants of the summer school about their remarks or questions. And as usual, I would like to start with the participants who are following the online program, because we do not forget them. They are at home all over Europe, and we want now to give you the floor. So Elona or Afit, do you have questions from those persons, or somebody ready to take the floor? Brussels, hello? Nobody?
There are a few raised hands among the online participants. I don't know if I'm the only one who sees that. Sorry, this is Caroline speaking.
I see your hand, Caroline, and Farzamfar and Lucas, but
I don't want to push in front. I don't know who's organizing the questions. I don't want to jump the queue.
Well, maybe go ahead till the moment we are better organized for collecting the questions, and let also collect a few questions and not answer them one by one. So please, Caroline, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Caroline Popp. I work for the Expert Council on Integration and Migration in Berlin, in Germany. Thank you very much for speaking to us. I'm interested in Frontex's operations in third countries. As far as I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there is now a enlarged scope for Frontex to work to operate also in countries outside the EU through capacity building and other means. And I'm interested in what the fundamental rights risks are in particular that you see in that context, and also, of course, your the scope of your mandate to monitor and, if necessary, intervene in operations that take place outside the EU. You've just mentioned the complaints mechanism and how if something concerns a national authority, you have to hand over to that national authority, including in third countries. So, for example, is it part of Frontex's role to make sure that such mechanisms exist, in fact, in the countries that you work with. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's collect some other questions. Please go ahead.
Yes, if you don't mind, I will go next. Thank you very much for your very helpful overview. My name is Lukas Rasche. I work for the Jacques Delors Center, also in Berlin, similar to Caroline. I have two questions. The first relates to the number of investigations that I believe you're very well aware of, both from media, from within Frontex, but also from the European Parliament, on alleged pushbacks. And my question would be, if you can say something about how you position yourself to these investigations, whether you will pick up on them, for example, or whether you will also work with the European Parliament in their ongoing investigation. And the second question refers to the tools at your disposal that you just mentioned. You said that one of the tools would be sort of giving input also in preparing operational plans. And my question would be whether there is an obligation on the side from the executive director, for example, to sort of implement your advice, or whether that's just advice that can be implemented. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take one last question from the participants online.
Yeah, I think I am the next one who has raised hand. Hi, thank you very much, Dr. Bruycker, and also Dr. Grimheden, for your fascinating session. Your mandate is very interesting, and it reminded me of the UN Special Rapporteur mandate. My name is Marnoush. I'm doing my doctoral degree at Faculty of Law, Helsinki University, and particularly in the field of constitutional law. So my work is specifically on the right to seek asylum and also securitization. So the fact that the right is a fundamental right, but at the same time, in practice, it is extremely securitized. I was wondering, within your mandate, what is the role of your office to minimize this level of securitization, to give more real meaning to Article 18 of the EU Charter? So would it be even possible in practice? So that is the core of my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's start with those four questions, and I leave you the floor, Mr. Grimheden, to answer.
Thank you very much. Very good questions, and I will do my best to respond. To Caroline, danke. I think the role outside of the EU is also fully within my mandate. So there is no, as I see it, no limitation to focus on the EU only. And I think one could say, since we have an EU acquis, I guess the fundamental rights risk could be greater the further we go. At the same time, I think the involvement of Frontex, the further we go, is less operational and less risk prone. So in that sense, maybe the risk is smaller. But of course, we have to be very cautious since we know less, we have less of this EU acquis to rely on, and we have to be indeed tread carefully. Part of the mandate is monitoring of the returns. I haven't mentioned that. And that is, of course, to far away and exotic countries. And we have to make sure that those returns are done in a proper way. And you mentioned the mechanisms. And indeed, we conclude an agreement with the authorities of the country that also highlights the actual mechanisms. So we're aware of the mechanisms. We have contacts established with the respective mechanisms. And of course, if they are not functional, we will have to take action. So I think that's in theory, at least, and as so far as I've seen in practice, that's all good. Practice in the long run will tell if I'm right. Lukas, danke dir auch. On investigations, media and the European Parliament, of course, I'm following that closely. I think the first week of me being in the office, I was twice interacting with the scrutiny working group of the European Parliament, one hearing and one separate meeting. And I've also met with them before I took office and since that first week. So I think it's inevitably something that I am focusing on. I'm not sure we will revisit the same cases that has been looked at, for instance, by the management board. I'm not sure how helpful it is, what we can contribute to, but I think we will focus on rather things that will happen or are happening, and try to look at systemic issues. If we run after each incident that happens within an investigation, I think we will not manage. But where we see patterns of problems, we will have to put a lot of resources. On your other question there, Lucas, on the operational plans and how much of an obligation it is for the executive director, by law there is no obligation. It's an advisory role. But of course, like I said in my introductory remarks, my credibility will go some way, and of course also the external pressure will go some way. So if I would advise, I'm just making this up, I've seen so far only willingness from the executive director to take my advice, but let's say I advise him on 100 things in the coming months, and he only takes up 25 of them, and I would argue that my 100 advice are legitimate and reasonable. I will, of course, escalate that to the management board or to the European Parliament or wherever I need to go, and say that this is not acceptable. But again, this is a hypothetical case. I haven't made 100 recommendations yet, and what I've seen so far is rather that there is a great willingness from the executive director and throughout the organization to take on board all advice that is sort of operational and realistic to take on. On Menush's question, Kitos, thank you for that. On the securitization, it's a complex question, of course. It's not easy to respond in detail. But as late as yesterday, I was making comments in relation to one of the processes that I thought used the wrong language in the operational plan, that sort of suggested that it was not supporting a fundamental rights-based approach, but it was more security language that was used. And in all those situations, I and my colleagues ensure and insist that we have to use the right language at all levels. So in the operational plans, in the implementation, etc. And I've also stressed in the recruitment process and since I took office that it's not enough to do the fundamental rights as an add-on, as a training element that is you do a little bit in the beginning when you get recruited, and then you forget about it. And it's not enough that I erase it and tell people that fundamental rights is important. And that I also have backup from the management, from the highest management in the agency, where I've said that fundamental rights cannot be an annoying add-on. Fundamental rights must be at the core of the activity, and all of us have to lead by example. It's not me coming from the side criticizing. It should come from all of us, from the highest authority, and not only from training, but by doing through all deeds. And I think this is certainly a law enforcement agency with a lot of law enforcement staff, Coast Guard, police, custom officials, etc. So it's not an easy cultural adaptation, if I can use that word, but a change, or at least a learning process that I think is needed, so that even though we are a law enforcement agency, we have to have the EU values, the international law, the EU law, and fundamental rights ultimately at the core of the activities. At the same time, it is related to security. It is related to border management. So I also cannot be naive and too airy-fairy. But in that context, I think we have to ensure and insist that fundamental rights is part of that core language and part of the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We still have a maximum of 11 minutes. So Now, I think that we can collect 2 or 3 more questions, but please be extremely brief and precise in your questions so that Mr. Grimheden can answer and go to his next meeting. So please, who has a question? It would be surprising that nobody has a question.
I think you scared them off too much by saying that that I had to be at my meeting and leave some minutes before that. But indeed, if I think Manoush still has another question, or at least another hand there, and Emily is also there, I see.
So let's start with
exactly.
Emily, who had not yet the floor, please.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you can talk about the decision of Frontex to leave Hungary, to withdraw, because I know that's within the powers, and the ongoing assessment there with regard to whether Frontex will return or the kind of situation. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Emily.
Another quick question. Do not hesitate. I see that.
Yeah, there is another question online, I think. Merouche.
Yes.
Yes, I feel very lucky to have the chance to have this follow-up question. Just to be very, very quick, do you see the tension between the legal and political with regard to the right to seek asylum, the problem? It seems that we can't take any side or to make any balance. So I would really like to hear your opinion on this tension. Thank you.
Okay, and then a very last question. Nobody? No?
Amy, I think.
Okay. I just want to say that Cecile has written some questions in the chat.
Okay.
Yes, so we could read one.
Sure.
I'm not sure my microphone is functional. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, my question is, when there is a suspicion or evidence of right violation during a joint operation, who is responsible, the member state or the agency? When we read the Frontex mandate, it's not very clear for us. And I think it's a risk because for me, it's prevent the smooth running of complaints and perhaps increase the risk of impunity. I want to know your think about that. And I have another questions. Do you think it's normal that the third country nationals do not have access to Frontex operation plans when they ask for it? We have this experience with our partners in Africa. And when we ask some information about Frontex operational, like European citizens, we can access partially to this document, but our partners African not. And in fact, the Frontex operational plans have an evidence impact of their fundamental rights. So what do you think about that?
Thank you for these very precise questions. And now in the few minutes left, we leave the floor to Jonas Grimheden.
Thank you very much. If I start with the second question, Manoush asked about legal and political, and I guess the short answer would be yes. And the slightly more nuanced answer would be that certainly the political situation is crucial. My mandate is purely legal or purely fundamental rights based. But of course that situation will be affected by the political situation. I cannot go into the politics, but again, of course, it affects the work I do. And I'm in a way happy to do my part of the work when it comes to fundamental rights, EU law, international law, and then I will have to leave the political situation to the political masters in the EU. But I think the interaction with European Parliament, for instance, and the Commission so far that I've had also is very positive in that regard. That I'm sure I will get the backing from them, and then of course how far they can push in a way the member states is a totally different story, and the member states are indeed in many areas, and pardon the pun, pushing back on EU progress. On the first question on Hungary, yes, that was before I arrived, but as I understand it, a recommendation based on a court decision. So since the Court of Justice of the EU was concluding that Hungary has serious concerns with some of its border procedures, the Fundamental Rights Officer ad interim advised the ED to pull out, and the ED also acted accordingly. The ED is the executive director, sorry. I think this is a good way. I think, however, as I said in my introductory remarks, that rather than wait with this sort of nuclear option until a court decision is there, which might not happen in all cases, I would much rather have sort of a leverage that is incremental, so that we don't wait for the situation to go bad, but we try to introduce stronger and stronger safeguards when we see that the risk is increasing. And the same is true to get back into a country like Hungary, that the Frontex, in my view, should say we're willing to come back, but before that we need A, B, and C to happen. And even if those things happen, we need X, Y, and Z to be introduced as safeguards so that it doesn't go wrong again. On joint operations, and I didn't catch your name, but on joint operations, the third and fourth question poser, indeed, that's part of the complexity. Who is responsible? If it's Frontex staff, it's clearly Frontex. If it's member state staff in a joint operation, it's not so clear. And of course, it would be great if there was clarity, but as I said also in my introductory remarks, maybe this unclarity could also be to the advantage of fundamental rights, and where my mandate could also be used in that context. What is clear from the regulation is that the fundamental rights officer can do a certain level of investigation, but if there is a criminal investigation that is needed, it's clearly for the national authorities. So if an act amounts to a criminal act, then of course it should be handled by prosecutors in the member state. On the third country, nationals' access to O-plans, this is something I wasn't aware of. I can see that there is restricted access on these documents because it is operational, and not all operational things is useful to share, because then it sort of compromises the operational plan, the operational goal rather. And if I simplify, of course, you don't want to tell, if we talk about crime prevention, cross-border crime prevention, we don't want to tell the criminals where we have staff that could be better at detecting crime. At the same time, of course, there has to be the greatest possible transparency and access. And I know too little to say what Frontex needs to improve, but I know that we get a lot of requests for access to documents, and I know that a lot of our documents are or become public. So I feel that there is a readiness at least to share documents, and I'm sure that could be improved further, but I know again too little to say if it's far from good or half decent. I think that's what I could say in relation to these questions, and I see also time is clicking, and just to tell you what my next meeting is about, it's one of these serious incident reports where I will meet with colleagues from around the building, and we will look at one of these specific incidents that happened on the Mediterranean a few days ago, and try to determine what went well and what went wrong and what could we do about it.
So indeed, it is time to let you go, but let me before really thank you warmly for having accepted to be with us this morning. We are very glad to have the possibility to exchange with you, and hopefully in the future, as you are interested by academia. And I think that if you cannot manage it, it will be very difficult for another person to manage this, because I saw in your curriculum that you were teaching not only international human rights law, but also comparative law. And then I had to say that I was very impressed that it included Chinese law. So if you manage to teach Chinese law, you certainly have all the competences to do your job as a fundamental rights officer. Thanks again for
Thank you.
With us, and indeed good work with the serious incident report.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Thanks, Ilona, and thanks to all of you for listening. And my Chinese might come in handy. Who knows? Thank you.
Thank you very much.